I'd like to welcome everyone to the CO podcast series, Stroke Matters. A special thank you to Vista Health for sponsoring this podcast. My name is Christine Winicky, CO Director. The topic for today's call is art therapy. I would like to introduce our presenter for today. Carrie Biamonte is presently married and living in rural Northwest Illinois. She holds a bachelor's degree in Fine and Performing Arts from Governor State University. Before suffering a stroke in 2004, Carrie worked as a senior designer for an educational publisher in Chicago. Several part-time jobs later, Carrie decided to return to the easel and opened Silver Tap Studio in 2013. It is in this space that she creates and sells her paintings. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you for being a presenter. I'd like to just ask you a few questions today. And the first question I'd like to ask you is, can you tell us a little bit about you and your stroke?
Well, Christine, I'm a 17-year stroke survivor of an acute cerebral infarct. I'll never forget those words. I heard those words spoken by my physician while I was still on a ventilator. I was only 42 years old and completely unaware that the blurred vision that I was experiencing was a stroke symptom. Prior to that event, I can tell you that I'd been living an extremely stressful lifestyle compounded by inflammatory bowel disease. There was just no end in sight for me until I had the stroke. I can honestly say that the stroke saved both my life and my soul.
Wow, Carrie, that's amazing. And so so you had your stroke, and then why don't you give us a little bit about how art has kind of helped you through that stroke journey? Because through the introduction we talked about how things have changed since you had your stroke. How has art helped you through your stroke journey?
Sure. Well, art in all its forms has always been one of my main coping mechanisms. As a child, I needed to make things. So when a serious illness had me confined to a bed when I was 7 years old, I began writing and drawing. It was the only outlet I had to me at the time, and that practice has remained with me to this day. Oftentimes, survivors who are struggling with motor, speech, or cognitive impairments are angry, frustrated, and ashamed of our disabilities. Art helps me quiet my mind, and it forces me to problem solve. When I'm engaged in a creative process, I absolutely require a space that offers solitude and makes me feel safe and free from the judgment of others and criticism.
Wow. You know what? That sounds amazing. And can you just tell me a little bit about what is art therapy and maybe some forms of art therapy? Because I know that you're a painter and a drawer, but I'm sure there's other ways that people can, express themselves through art.
Yeah. Well, I think we know that clinically speaking, art therapy is a creative process that's facilitated by a professional art therapist.
Mm-hmm.
They use not only the act of art making, but they also apply psychological theory. Victims of violent crime, post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain injury, and a host of other life-altering circumstances could benefit from this type of therapy. It can help in areas of conflict resolution. It gives a person personal insight, and for stroke survivors, it can help with their improved cognitive and sensory motor functioning. It's essentially, Christine, a tool. It's a tool used in place of one's voice. It's a visual voice when talking verbally is either simply inadequate or just too painful.
Awesome. And I would think it would also really, I'm not very artistic personally, but just boost their self-esteem, particularly for a stroke survivor, don't you think? If they, can create art and like we said, whether it's painting or drawing or sketching, there's also, they could, just be making puppets or shadow boxes or doodling or crocheting or sewing. I mean, there's lots of different forms of art.
Oh, right. Absolutely. And those fine motor skills can really be engaged when we're doing such work.
Right. So art encompasses really a whole variety of different avenues, even coloring. I know that this whole coloring craze for adults and adult coloring, and I've just heard recently, like kind of this connect the dots and adult connect the dots, that you're still kind of creating something and at the same time using your brain. And some of them are quite difficult. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of dots that I've tried myself personally because I'm not very artistic. And it's quite difficult to connect the dots when you have about 500 to connect. But again, it's a skill, and then you come up with a beautiful picture. And if you're not too artistic like me, it is just something fun to do. It's kind of a doodling type activity.
Right. They're doing that with Zentangling also, if you've heard about that.
No, what is that, Carrie? Can you explain that a little?
Zentangling?
Yes.
Well, the word Zen meaning, meditation, repetition. So it's a doodle, but it gives itself, like you start off with a small space, let's just say maybe a 5-inch by 5-inch square of a free form square. And then you begin doing a series of these repetitions. And as you progress through these repetitions and you do some shading, and it's just, you start out black and white and then you can evolve to color, it begins to take a 3-dimensional form, kind of like a mandala.
Wow.
Yes. And they use that an awful lot with PTSD survivors from the war. It's just sort of like this meditation, and it just begins to grow and grow. And then you can get larger and larger.
Now, is this something, where would we find, I mean, is that something you can find on a website, or are there classes, or how would you know about this, or how would you find those type of resources, or maybe even other resources that, for art therapy?
I actually found out about Zentangling when I was working as a supportive housing director at the county here where I work at. And I had to go to a seminar and speak with homeless veterans. And there was a woman there at a long table with just these simple supplies and men sitting down doing this Zentangle art. And then before I knew it, I was seeing it branch out into other areas, like meditation areas that involved acupuncture and massage, those kind of like self-nurturing treatments.
Wow, that's so fascinating. I've never heard of that. And I think that's a really great resource for, stroke survivors, even caregivers, because caregivers, as we all know, it's hard for them too. So I think art therapy can really help anybody, in particular during these times. So I think, all of us could benefit from it.
Oh, heck yes. Even students under a lot of stress.
Right, right. What are the long-term benefits of art therapy? How has it helped you kind of long-term and with your studio and your art studio? Can you give us a little details about maybe some of the long-term benefits that you maybe see?
Well, on a physical level, I believe that we are working both sides of our brain. People think that art only involves the right side of our brain. But we begin, first of all, by using the left side of our brain because we have to analyze our feelings and we have to organize them on paper. Then we switch to our right brain in order to begin creating and placing images on your chosen format, followed by choosing colors, textures, etc. There is also a hand and eye coordination that takes place when a person interacts with various materials and learns how to use those specific materials, whether they're clay, thread, oil painting, pencil. They use those materials to process through their recovery. Christine, art was primarily used as a means to explore the connection between us humans and the heavens. Like when you think about the Renaissance period, like Michelangelo, the big Sistine Chapel, the many works of Giotto, all those things were very religious in nature. It's almost like they were trying to create a relationship between heaven and earth, us and them, through their artwork. It was extremely intense. And I believe that's the point of one of the many benefits of therapeutic art, that we're sort of bridging this gap. We're forging a connection between us, the survivors, and those who care for us. So in the midst of great loss, there lies this artistic pathway of communication.
Wow, that was such an excellent way of putting it, of really the benefits and how important art therapy really is. I mean, I guess I never thought of it in that way. That is very fascinating. Do you have anything more that you'd like to share before we end the call? Is there anything more about, your art studio or what you're doing that you'd like to share with the audience?
Well, I can say that it's really not easy work often. It's painful when you're trying to, for those survivors who are disabled in many ways. It's not easy work. It's a painful process. I think people will often think, oh, art therapy, how fun. But if you're a victim of a crime, or if you've suffered a traumatic brain injury, it could either be physically demanding or really emotionally painful to dig deep inside to look at what the issues are, let alone to risk the vulnerability to put it out there finally on paper, whether you're writing it, drawing it, painting it, sewing it, whatever it may be, and then show it to those who care or your therapist. It's a difficult process, but it's so worth the effort.
Yeah, a real expression
Yes.
of what's going on. So that's an excellent way of putting it. Well, I think this ends our call for today. So I'd like to thank you again, Carrie, for being our presenter. If you'd like to listen to today's podcast or past podcast, you can visit the CO website at www.sseo.org. Thank you. Thank you again, Carrie.
Thank you very much, Christine.